Vic Beasley, big defensive player for the Atlanta Falcons. He is out for a month. This is huge. This guy was a sack leader of the NFL, a big piece of a Falcons defense that isn't really known to be a great defense, but they do have a decent defense. This guy is the kingpin of that defense. He will be out at least a month. They face the Detroit Lions in Detroit, which is massive. Also, we don't know the status of Sam Bradford. Bradford is supposedly supposed to be playing, but we'll find out shortly.
Judge.
Clark Judge, it's Raw Mike Richards calling. Well, you don't have to call me Raw Mike Richards. I think that would be weird, especially a phone call man to man. You might say I'm not paying for the service, but Clark. Okay, great to have you on the show today.
Hey, Clark,
we really
how's it going,
appreciate it.
Okay, all right.
Look, I'm watching the game last night, and so I get it, Clark, that the cycle of players, their ability to play at the height of their athleticism that makes them great professional athletes. There's a window for it. It's always limited. But the one thing that I think, Clark, at least to my looking at that game last night, and even the game beforehand, sometimes it's about readiness. Sometimes it's about preparation and what that team has brought to the field. And I'll be honest, aside from all the other issues that they have, I just don't think the Giants are prepared. I don't think they're ready, Clark.
Well, they're not ready, but that, to me, is another issue. Sometimes you just don't have the talent. And I think that's the biggest issue with that offensive line. There's nobody that can run behind that offensive line. There's not a quarterback who can play behind them. You saw what Eric Flowers was doing at left tackle. That's a guy that Jerry Reese made a first-round draft pick. And he hasn't gotten any better. And that offensive line wasn't any good a year ago. It got Eli Manning buried a year ago. And guess what? And Eli Manning buried again. So to me, it's as much about talent. I understand what you're saying about preparation. Yeah, I mean, the Lions look better, but the Lions are more rounded.
Are you surprised at all, Clark? And thanks for joining us this morning. Really appreciate you spending some time with us. Are you surprised by this Giants 0-2 start? We all expected the Jets to be the duds of the city of New York. That's and as a Jets fan myself, I'm actually hoping they go 0 for the season because there's a lot of nice star quality at the quarterback position. But that aside, right. I'm shocked that the Giants are playing as poorly as they have been and 0-2 to start the year.
Yeah, me too. I mean, you look at their defense, you said the defense isn't a problem. And I don't think the defense is a problem. They played pretty well last night, with some exceptions. But by and large, you can win with that defense, and it's so much better than it had been 2 years ago when it was leaking like the Titanic. But the offense was something when, you got Eli Manning. The offensive line's got to be better, right? Because they're more experienced. And the answer is no, they're not better. The running game that they didn't have a year ago, that'll be better because the offensive line will be better, right? No, it's not. And you can't protect him with that line or that running game. He's in trouble. So I don't care whether you have 5 OBJs out there. It doesn't make a difference. He doesn't have the time to get the ball down the field, doesn't have the time to get it out. And after a while, with all those hits, those cumulative hits, he becomes a guy with happy feet, a guy who can't wait to get rid of the ball, and a guy who's very nervous in the pocket. And I think that's what you're looking at now. I mean, once upon a time, we talked about Eli Manning as this guy, will be in the Hall of Fame sometime. I don't hear anybody saying that anymore. And I'm on that committee. And honestly, I'd say, no, he's so inconsistent.
Yeah.
Since he won that second Super Bowl, there hasn't been an uphill climb. There hasn't been. It just hasn't been a steady progression north. He's been all over the place, very inconsistent. So's that team. They haven't won a playoff game, and I would not have said that after they beat the Patriots in the 2011 game.
Clark, when you look at the Mara family, who very well respected, obviously in the league, very established, and they, look, it's not like they don't understand football. So when they take an analysis, because it is a business, do we not put some of the blame at their feet, saying, how could we get to this point where it literally looks like the wheels are falling off? How could we not have replenished ourselves, whether it's picks, whether it's free agency? How much blame do we actually put on the family for this?
Well, they're the ones that hire the employees, and certainly Jerry Reese, the GM, is one of their hires. But I wouldn't get too lost in this right now. Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, they look bad. They look bad, but a week ago, people were jumping off the cliff here in New England saying, what's wrong with the Patriots? Tom Brady suddenly looks his age. Well, a week later, very different perspective. I mean, the Giants look bad right now. I've been through this before with them. I remember, I think it was 86. Coughlin was fighting for his life, and they said he's not going to make it, and they won their last game. And turns out they got to the playoffs. They lost there, but he got another chance. 2007, they actually win the Super Bowl. But they've started 0-2 before and righted themselves. It looks bleak. I'm going to tell you right now, they don't look like a team that could win that division. But that division looks eminently winnable to anybody at this point. I mean, Dallas, to me, isn't the team that they were a year ago. They've got all sorts of internal dysfunction, it seems like. I mean, after that last loss, it's a loss. I mean, you lost, okay, you got blown out in Denver. It happens. But here's the coach throwing the quarterback under the bus. Here's Ezekiel Elliott quitting on the team. There's some reasons not to believe in them. What about Philadelphia? Well, no, they just look like they're missing something too. Same thing with Washington. For as bad as they are, the Giants 0-2, they're still only one game out of first place, and it's early. We've got 14 more games, but yeah, they've got to do something about that offensive line. And until or unless they do, that team's going to be a disaster.
We're on the line with Clark Judge. He's a host of the Talk of Fame Network, joining us here on Raw. Mike Richards, also mornings on YouTube.com. You talk about winnable divisions, Clark, the NFC West and what Seattle's doing right now, and you kind of bring in the same conversation about what the hell's going on with that offensive line. Seattle looks very beatable right now, and at the start of the season, a lot of people thought you have a really nice defense. A lot of people heading to free agency. This might be the last year this defense is actually as solid. They pick up Sheldon Richardson from the Jets just a couple days before the regular season. Things are looking good, but that offense, Clark, I don't know if they can hang with the Lions or the Packers or the Cowboys of that NFC. I had higher expectations, but after 2 games, they're a big fail to me.
Yeah, they are, but again, I would say to slow down the train a little bit. Look at what happened to Green Bay a year ago. They started out, I think, 3-5, and they looked awful. And I, for one, said, you know what, this is the year. This is the year they're not making it. And they did, thanks in part to Detroit losing its last 3 games, including 1 to Green Bay, and Matt Stafford hurting himself. But the fact is they made it. And then they go to the conference championship game. But if you look around league-wide, what's going on in Seattle, what's going on in New York is not all that unusual. Offensive line play, guys, generally is atrocious. It really is. It's generally atrocious. I think all you have to do is spend a couple of minutes watching games and going, what the heck is going on? It just seems to me that there's a dearth of really good offensive linemen to combat these really super talented and super superior defensive athletes. They just don't have what it takes to keep them out of there. And, look at Russell Wilson. He's fighting for his life back there, and he's running. Eli Manning's fighting for his life, but he can't run. He's getting sacked. Aaron Rodgers is on the move. I mean, you look across the board, offensive line play is not very good. And I agree with you. What's going on in Seattle? I look at them and went, boy, they're having trouble just getting in the end zone. But they're not alone. There are a lot of teams, including, of course, Cincinnati can't even find the end zone. But there are a lot of teams that have trouble getting there. And yet then we look at someone like, the Patriots or typically, but New Orleans. But even New Orleans has got issues because what? Offensive line and can't run the ball. Those are 2 really critical elements to building a successful and deep throwing offense, because you protect the quarterback with that. If you can't, they're coming after you. And if you can't do it, all he's doing is throwing quick slants and screens, and that's not the way to get the ball down the field. Sorry.
Clark, I thought it was interesting you bring up Cincinnati. I like that quote from A.J. McCarron. It was like, oh, what, me? No. Everyone should be cheering for Andy Dalton. He's the one.
Right.
He should be staying in because I really think he doesn't want any of that action. Sure, maybe we get to see Catherine Webb once in a while. I mean, that's a good thing. But otherwise, I'm looking at Andy Dalton, and look, it's not like he hasn't been under scrutiny beforehand. I don't think he's really even received love after his TCU time. I mean, he really only had maybe a couple of years where people were not sure. Are we sure now that he is not ever going to be that top 5 or an elite quarterback? Or are we blaming more the system that he's in, the offensive line that he has? Which way does your barometer go?
I'm of the mind now that he's a guy who can put up numbers for you, but he's not going to win big games. I've been of that mind for about a year or so. I've been pretty close to some people in and around that team, and they love him, and they think he's a terrific quarterback. I don't see it, and especially guys who look at the playoff record. I think he's 0-4 in the playoffs. He gets them to the playoffs. He's gotten them his first 4 years, got them to the playoffs, and actually 5th year as well, got them to the playoffs, and that was an accomplishment, especially with a team that had trouble historically getting there, but he got them there. And what happened when they got there? They stumbled and they tripped, and then that 5th year, A.J. McCarron takes over, and guess what? They won the game. They won their first playoff game, except they didn't because Perfect and Adam Jones lost their minds, and so they even found a way to blow a game, and so the defense did that time. But I looked at McCarron in that playoff game, and I thought, you know what? I see something here. There's something here. And by this time, you really you get what you know what you're getting with a quarterback. You really do. I mean, I sometimes it takes a little bit longer. Drew Brees in his first 3 years was a disappointment in San Diego, so they drafted Phillip Rivers in Brees' fourth year. Lo and behold, Drew Brees became Drew Brees, and Rivers was nailed to the bench, and the division title went to the playoffs. That is unusual, but it happens. It does happen where guys suddenly get it. But at this point, Andy Dalton is who he is. I mean, he really is, and I think you can win some games with him. Can you win big games? I don't trust him, and especially now with that offensive line. He lost 2 key offensive linemen in the offseason. They're not any good either. I mean, just repeating the same thing. Their offensive line's not any good either. So he's got trouble. I think at some juncture, and probably pretty soon, we're going to see A.J. McCarron. And I think it's probably time to turn the page, and they could get something for Dalton. My point with Dalton is he can get you to the playoffs. He can't get you farther than that. I don't know that you can ever win a playoff game or a big game with him because that's who he is. With McCarron, I don't know. But what I saw in one playoff game where he was pressed into duty because of an injury, well, he looked pretty good.
Yeah, he certainly did. We're on the line with Clark Judge joining us here on Raw. Mike Richards. Some of your surprises, and I know it's only been 2 weeks, but as team surprises go, what are you pleasantly surprised about through 2 weeks of the NFL season?
Probably Trevor Siemian in Denver. I mean, I look at Denver and I thought, whoa. And but in that division, Kansas City was a team I thought was going backwards. I really did, because the draft of Mahomes with the 10th pick, I thought that was really sort of an unfair and unkind shot at Alex Smith for what he had done there. But that was Andy Reid telling you, I can't go any further. At least I don't think I can go any farther with Alex Smith. We can't get the ball down the field like I'd like. We can't go any farther. I want somebody who can get the ball down the field. And Alex Smith certainly understands that. That's why he said this week, I don't think I'm going to be here next year. Well, I don't think he is either. But in the meantime, he threw the ball down the field effectively against the Patriots in week 1. He looks awfully good. That team is running the ball. They lost, Jamal Charles in the offseason. I thought, boy, they're going to have trouble. And then they lose a starting running back, Spencer Ware, before the season. What are they going to do? How are they going to score points? Well, they're scoring a lot of points. And their defense is really, really solid. So there are 2 surprises in that division. In the NFC, I'm with you guys, and wouldn't say surprised the other direction, disappointed with the Giants, but I'll give them the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, Eli Manning, he's a guy that can pull them out. Do I think he will? No, but he can, and he's done it before. But that offensive line is so bad. Let's just see what happens. Honestly, going back to the AFC West, Marshawn Lynch honestly is a surprise to me. I wasn't sure what you're going to get this year after he took last year off, and honestly the year before he only played 7 games with Seattle, and he wasn't very good. But he looks pretty good now. He's 31. Let's see what he looks like in November, December.
When you talk about surprises, and again, after 2 weeks, boy, the sample size is pretty small, and depending on who your opponent was, you don't get a lot from it. So therefore, I'm unsure of the Detroit Lions, just how good they are. How good are they?
I think they're pretty good.
Yeah.
I think they're pretty good. And here's why. A year ago, they should have won that division. They should have won the NFC North. It turns out it was Green Bay. Why? Because Detroit went back those last 3 games. Why? Because of the injury to Matt Stafford. He's everything to that ball club. I had somebody tell me recently they shouldn't have paid him the money they did. Well, no, I think we should have. I mean, is it a lot of money? Yeah. Is it too much? I don't know. It's what the market can bear. And is he the best quarterback in the game? No, he's not. I mean, Tom Brady's the best quarterback in the game. And is he the best quarterback in the division? No, he's not. Aaron Rodgers is the best quarterback in that division. Nevertheless, he's a guy who can do for you what others before him couldn't. And we saw that last year with those 8 fourth-quarter comebacks. He did it again in the season opener. He's a guy that can win that division, and they're better defensively. That's a team, honestly, that's improved itself, I think, up front with its offensive line. It's rare to hear that, but I think they're better up front. And now you look at the Lions and think, listen, had they won last year, we wouldn't be asking this question. They didn't. They can get to the playoffs. Now, the next question is, another Andy Dalton. He hasn't won a playoff game. I don't think he is. I think you get something different with Stafford. He's a tough guy. He's a guy who's at his best when things are down, when things are falling apart. I thought he was an MVP candidate until he got hurt last year. So, no, they're not a surprise to me. Yes, they are as good as they appear. And I do think they push and will push Green Bay in that division. And I'll tell you right now, guys, I would not be surprised if they won that division.
Yeah, and it would be something else for the Lions to do that. And speaking of the Lions, nice test for them going into Week 3 with the Atlanta Falcons coming to now. Vic Beasley will be out. That is massive to a Falcons defense that is, still growing. Obviously, they're not as advanced as the offensive side of the Falcons, and we all know what that looks like. That test for Detroit is that kind of from the non-believer of the Lions. I'm on board with the Lions right now myself personally, but the non-believer, if Detroit wins this weekend in Detroit against the Falcons, are we going to see more people start to look at Detroit and go, you know what? Not only a division possibility, but watch out for them in the postseason because they might be making some noise.
Yeah, absolutely you will. When I covered the 49ers in the 1990s, they would measure themselves against the best team in their conference. And the best team in their conference in the early 90s was Dallas. And actually for the first 5 years, it was Dallas. And so they manned themselves to compete and overcome. In 94, they overhauled their linebacking core. They brought in Deion Sanders. They brought in Charles Mann. They brought in Richard Dent. They brought in all these free agents because the idea was we're going to beat Dallas at their game. What hurt us a year ago? We're going to overcome Dallas. Now I think Detroit looks at this and says, listen, we've got a chance now to beat the defending NFC champion. They're the best team in the NFC. Until or unless somebody beats them, they're the best team in the NFC. And they should be Super Bowl champions. They should have been. New England had played a great game. Tom Brady was tremendous, but they gave them the opportunity. They kicked that game to the curb. So now we have a chance to make a statement here. We have a chance to tell our fans that we can play on the same level with a team that was the best in the NFC a year ago and a team who should have beaten Tom Brady and the Patriots. And, if they win this game, you're going to have a lot of people going, Detroit? Huh? Detroit? But you guys are on it before anyone else. Canada's way ahead of us now. So, you guys are on top of it. You're absolutely right.
And finally, let's talk about the Jets. I mean, they pretty much took a knee before the season started, and maybe they start punting on first down. I mean, I don't know what they got to do, but if they're looking at what's coming down the pipeline, and again, as you look at teams who literally, I'm not saying tank necessarily, but if you want to use that word, if you see a Josh Rosen coming out, if you see a Sam Darnold coming out, and again, between those two, I'm trying to think the last time where I saw both Los Angeles area universities where their quarterbacks were the talk of the NFL. It's been a long time since that happened at once, and I think it's exciting. Like I'm old school. I mean, I lived in Eugene, Oregon when it was the Pac-8, so I'm going back a ways, but I kind of like it.
Terry Baker.
Yeah. If you're looking, and let's say the Jets do what they want to do, and they roll over this year, and they have, and again, we're just really at the start of college ball itself. Of the talk that you hear, which guy, if it is possible that one of these guys would be number one, or at least the choice of, let's say, a Jets, which way do you think they'd lean?
Darnold. I think Darnold's the guy right now. In a pro-style offense, he's making more mistakes this year. I mean, the interceptions are up, the touchdowns are down. But Darnold's the guy. I think people look at him as that guy. It's just he's got pro quarterback stamped all over him. Now, the drawback is people say, well, when's the last great quarterback that came out of USC? Carson Palmer? He's not exactly a great quarterback. He was good. He was very good. He's not anymore, but he was very good when he was with Cincinnati and, early with Arizona. But and then, with UCLA, Rosen, I like what I see with him. I mean, he's got to try to outscore that defense. To me, he's the collegiate football versions of Drew Brees. I mean, you have to try to outscore your own defense, and that's tough. But I think Darnold's the guy, and I think that's always been the guy in terms of who they're talking about with the Jets from the very beginning. I know, again, people in and around that team and writers in that city, Darnold's always been the name that comes up, and it was about playing for Darnold. Now, it's funny, I was thinking of something while you were talking about that. It sort of reminds me of Indianapolis, when Andrew Luck was coming out. And there's another team you're talking about surprised at Indianapolis. I'm surprised at how bad the Colts are. Mm-hmm. And the question is now, who's going to get that number one pick? 2 weeks into the season, you guys might say it might be either of those two New York teams. It's not going to be the Giants, are far better. But the Jets, you look around and they've got to basically, which they've done, strip that place apart, tool it down, and then rebuild from the bottom. They're doing that, except you've got a 38-year-old quarterback. Well, there's a spot where they're just waiting for somebody, a young guy, to come and take his place. And they gave Christian Hackenberg every opportunity this summer to do it. He can't. He's the third-string quarterback, guys. That's how bad it is. They gave him an opportunity to start. He's the third-string quarterback behind Petty and McCown. So it's a situation where there's nobody there. They're simply going to find out about other positions this season. They're going to win a game somewhere along the line. They'll win a game, but I have no doubt in my mind they'll be the team sitting with the first pick. And right now, I'd say there's no doubt in my mind who they'll take. It'll be Sam Darnold from USC.
Clark, are you a born and raised New York area guy? Where did you grow up?
No. Some people say I haven't grown up. My wife says I haven't grown up yet, but my dad was in the military, the U.S. Marine Corps, so we moved all over the country and the world when I was a kid, and went to 3 high schools in 4 years. So we lived in Hawaii, we lived up and down the East Coast, Newport, Rhode Island, Camp Lejeune, Quantico, places like that, Norfolk. So I lived all over the place, and then I finally I moved to Baltimore and covered the Baltimore Colts, and went out to San Diego, covered the Chargers, moved up to San Francisco, covered the 49ers, came back and got married actually to my wife in New York City. And we lived there since we got married. So that's how I got to New York. I've been around the Northeast for much of my life. I went to school up in New England, went to a place called Dartmouth College in New Hampshire. But I'm back here sort of reluctantly, but I love being back here. But I thought I was staying in California, but then I got married, and we're staying in the Northeast.
So you're like the Johnny Cash song. You've been everywhere. It's safe to say.
Yeah, that's right. But I tell you, it's fun being back here because, guys, actually, I get a chance now to see a guy that I love watching. That's Tom Brady, and I've mentioned to you before. Being on the Hall of Fame committee, we deal with a lot of exceptional athletes. This guy is so extraordinary, and I marvel at the people who want to poke holes in his career or say, well, he's a horizontal passer. These passes are 3 and 5 yards. He's extraordinary, and what he's doing at the age of 40 is something to behold, and we won't appreciate it until he's gone. And like everything else, you don't know what you have until he's gone. I get to see him each week, and I really enjoy it. I love being around that guy and around that team. It's very difficult to deal with the head coach at times. I'm not saying I'm there every week. I'm not, but I've dealt with him in the past. And there's just something about Brady, a competitive quality that I marvel at. And you see it in the great ones, but you don't see it translated into what he's done, which is 7 Super Bowls and 5 championships, especially doing what he did at the age of 39 in the most recent Super Bowl when we were talking about Atlanta.
Well, and so when I look at this path you've taken, why, Clark, why a Habs fan? Why?
Because I love teams that win. You go, then why? No. I'll tell you why. When I was a kid, I loved watching them play, but that was certainly as long ago. I go back probably much younger than you guys and remember the Bellevaux teams, and they had so many great stars. Cornway was my favorite player. I love Yvonne Cornway. Sure. And honestly, I hate to admit this, but I will. I love the sweater. I love the sweater.
It's a classic. God, it is.
It's a beautiful, and there was a dignity about the form when they played there. The people in coats and ties, there was a dignity about that I love. And so I just hung on to it. I hung on to it, and they're not, it was sad for me to see. I'd say to my wife, we get the center ice, and so we watch them all the time. Try to watch as many games as possible during the year. And when Bellevaux would be shown, at center ice watching the games he did at the home games, I said to my wife, I can only imagine what he's thinking watching this team in those sweaters. It's not even close to those clubs. Ted Robinson, Bellevaux, LePerriere. But I just love the aura around that club, mostly because of the history, mostly because of what I remember. Honestly, there's not a Montreal Canadian who's my favorite hockey player. There's not. My favorite hockey player of all time is Bobby Orr. I've never seen anybody in any sport dominate a sport like Bobby Orr. And here in the United States, people say, Michael Jordan went. He's not even close to what Bobby Orr was so good. He killed 2-minute penalties by himself. Unfortunately, he wasn't in a video era where we get those things readily, available.
Yeah.
We see things today over and over and over again. What Bobby Orr did on a daily basis, and I had the pleasure of seeing him, when he was a kid. When I saw him when he was 18 in Boston Garden, and I remember seeing him. My sister was in college. I went, I've never seen anything like this. This guy's unreal. It was such a privilege to watch him play and privilege to watch that team. While I was a Canadian fan, I was a Bobby Orr fan, and I've got a Bobby Orr sweatshirt, and it's got the Bruins spoke, which I loathe because I loathe the Bruins.
You have to. Yeah.
Because of it. Yeah, and I've got Montreal Canadian sweatshirts, which I wear all the time. But that one, I just love Bobby Orr, guys, and honestly, anyone who didn't see him, I feel sorry for him because when people tell me the greatest player was this and this guy and this guy. It's the same thing we deal with the Hall of Fame. They're generally modern or more recent, really recent players that the latest is the greatest. And you'll mention a name to them, for instance, like, Jack Lambert. And I had a guy say to me, "Who's Jack Lambert?"
Oh, boy.
Jack Lambert of the Steel Curtain, Pittsburgh. And he goes, "I've never heard of him." He said, "I've never heard of him."
Oh,
He's not on the board. He's not on the board because I've never heard of him. And he's a prominent national writer. And I said, "How could you never have heard of Jack Lambert?" He said, "When did he play?" And I said, "The Steel Curtain in the 70s. And he goes, "Well, that's before I was born, so I really should know about him." And I said, wait a second.
Yeah.
You cover this league. I said, Abraham Lincoln was the president way before I was born. I'll tell you what, I know about Abraham Lincoln.
Yep.
You have to know about this guy if you're covering this. Same thing about Bobby Orr. I mean, if you're a hockey fan, you have to know about Bobby Orr. I'm sorry to get off on the tangent.
No, Clark, but you bring up something.
I love
You bring up something that I've always said, which is, and it's funny that you sitting on a board that of Hall of Fame status. I find it difficult when guys want to get into arguments about players from different generations and who would beat who, or who was better than who. I said, well, I can't make that comparison. So I'm going to compare Howie Morenz to, you're the best of that era of that time, and it's not really transferable to me. So all of a sudden I'm going to then have to compare Johnny Unitas to Tom Brady. I can't. The rules aren't even, back then you could literally, Deacon Jones would do, you'd be arrested for on the street. It was a different era, a different time, and I hate that whole, who was better, because generationally, I just don't, even equipment alone, I just can't make the comparison.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you say that. And I find, honestly, what happens is the response you get is, you're an old fogey. You're just an old guy. You sound like your father. And I do. I probably sound like my father or grandfather. But I go, listen, I've seen these guys. I saw Unitas. I mean, the first game I ever saw was the 58 championship game. I was a kid, and I watched it on TV.
Wow.
And I was enthralled by it. And so I actually got Unitas signed a football for me. I got some photos that Unitas signed for me. And I got to know him briefly much later. And I said, I know I'm not supposed to say this. This is what I was covering the 49ers, covering Joe Montana and Steve Young and those guys. And I said, no, I'm not supposed to say this, but it's a privilege talking to you. I watched you play, and I've never seen anyone better. It was a privilege to watch you play. It's like, you go in we go to museums in New York, and you see somebody go, God, what, it's beautiful. That's the way it looked to me when Unitas was playing. And I would ask you guys, or anyone out there, if you can find videotape of the 58 championship game, and you watch Unitas and the Colts in that game, there's a real artistry to sort of the choreography of that game. It's in black and white, which it even adds to it. And you watch Unitas handle the ball, and I would defy you to find a better ball handler. And someone would say, well, Peyton Manning. Look at Unitas. You can't follow the ball half the time, and you're right. It's going downfield. Receivers are getting mugged. There's contact everywhere. And yet the game it's a thing of beauty. I mean, and when the Unitas had the ball with 2 minutes to go, there was no question in my mind he was going to get down the field, but and he was going to score. He was going to beat you. But there's such a difference in the rules today. To me, it's a lot of it's, I hate to say this, I think it's affected by fantasy football. We want to see offense. I love when the Steelers play the Ravens. I love it because they're low-scoring defensive games. They're games that to me are about football. But too much of it's more like touch football today. You watch up and down the field, especially the college game is ridiculous with some of these scores. But you can't touch the receivers. No one's allowed to play defense. When we watched videotapes of Chris Hamburger at the Hall of Fame when he was elected years ago, then they showed the videotape of Chris Hamburger. Every shot they took was a headshot. It was a headshot of the quarterback. Every shot. And you looked at and went, I don't think we can't show that one. No, we can't show that one. He would have been flagged for everything, but it was a completely different game. And now you breathe on the quarterback and it's 15 yards.
Yeah, well, and they're tossing kids out of those college games left and right. Like sometimes you go for popcorn or whatever, or a beer or whatever. You come back, half the defensive backs have been thrown out of the game. I'm like, what happened? That's what they do. And
I understand what the league's doing. Listen, I mean, your listeners might say, well, he wants to go back to the violence. No, I understand what the league's trying to do. I mean, with a concussion, it's a big deal. I mean, they're trying to mitigate the violence. Unfortunately, they've got a problem because what attracted people to the game, what made it so attractive to them was the violence that they're trying to mitigate now, and it's a tough deal. It's a very tough balancing act, and I think they have to do it. I don't know where we go from here, but it is a different game. I think the reason you watch some of those games in the 50s and 60s, they were played at a slower speed. Obviously, there were different There were different athletes who played at a slower speed, and I'm 100% with you on the generational thing. This thing of all time, you can't ever do that. I mean, someone asked me once, who would be the first player you take in a basketball draft? And I said, Bill Russell. I went, Michael Jordan. I said, Bill Russell. You'd never lose. I mean, never. What do you win? 11 championships in 13 years? You never lose.
Yeah.
Now, is he the greatest individual player? No, but you never lose with him. But that's just looking at that. I mean, you're right. If you're the best in your generation, guys today, football players today, have so much available to them that a Unitas or a Fran Tarkenton didn't. Don Meredith, any of the Wyatt Tittle, they didn't have those available to them because we've learned a lot more, and technologically we've got so far advanced. So they're training and practicing all year round. Johnny Unitas was working in the off season. Most of in fact, all those Colts were working in the off season in Baltimore. Unitas had a bar there, which was great. I mean, he had a bar restaurant, the Golden Arm, which was great.
See, that makes him even greater
so
to me. If you are Johnny Unitas, and in the off season your job is running a bar, you are the greatest of all time, bar none. No pun intended. Hey, Clark, we got to.
It's just, I mean, it was fun. It was fun. It was really fun to watch him.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for joining us here this morning. We really appreciate it. It's always a great time, and I love the fact that, again, one of the reasons that we've done this is because we can freelance and talk about what we want. There is no time on it, and a great conversation is a great conversation. That's exactly what we had here this morning, and I thank you so much, and hopefully we can catch up with you again sometime.
My pleasure. Anytime you want to talk Habs, guy, give me a call.
Thanks, Clark.
That is Clark Judge joining us here from the Talk of Fame Radio Network. Is that what I'm calling it?
Got it.
Network?
Talk of Fame Radio Network.
And
longtime supporter of the show at different levels of where we've been and so forth. And what, awesome guy, and really knows his NFL, as you can probably tell there by the last half hour.
Going.
What? Did we just become best friends?
Yep.